go. Yeah, I know, a big relax. Don't fall asleep on the couch. Yeah.
As long as they're not videoing, we can do whatever we want.
Folks, come on over. I think that we want to get started.
And you get
Find food and get seated.
How are you?
good. Hi, Pat Griffiths. We met. Yeah.
I know who you are.
Yeah.
We
Well,
only pick on people in the back row. And so, because the front row is obviously completely empty. See, people confuse that and think we pick on the front row.
yeah,
No.
Timo, you should come to the front, or we're
row
going to
knows
ask you
everything.
questions.
The back row knows nothing.
The chickens are in the back. Come on, we need people up front.
I have 3 employees here. I can.
And Dave's in my seat. So
There's
Oh, I'm in your seat.
our
Then I'm going over to.
okay.
Dave's moving over.
Excuse me.
First, that's
All right.
fine.
And you have to make welcoming remarks.
Yes, I will. Shall I welcome everyone?
In the
Yes,
mic.
please do.
Okay. I take the honor of welcoming you all to Alluvio tonight for the San Francisco SMPTE sectional meeting. First of all, thank you. Thanks for making the journey over to the East Bay if you aren't local, and those who are, probably enjoying it, so didn't have to travel as much. I'm Michelle Munson, and part of the Alluvio team is here. We're so happy that we could do this tonight and have you all join us here. Just a couple of opening remarks. We're a startup, obviously. We founded this company a year ago in December officially and started working on the concepts of it about a year and a half ago. And it is very new and very different. For those of you curious about what Alluvio is doing, we are hosting a demonstration of our software platform, and I'll do an overview as much as you're interested in after we do the main program. So come on down, and that'll be in our conference room if you can stay a little bit later. For the program tonight, Keith has organized a really interesting NAB wrap-up, or at least I think you guys are going to be interesting. I hope so.
Will we start?
This is
Are we going to record?
Yes.
Of course, we have Pat Griffiths to contribute. This will be very informal this evening, so please help yourself to pizza, salad, and or beer, wine, Diet Coke, water, etc. It's all over here. And with that, I just want to say thanks again, and let's keep kicking off the program.
Come on back. Okay. So now we know who Michelle is. Next to Michelle, Pat Griffiths, SMPTE president, and
And a fella.
good fella with
Thank you. Thank you.
A good fella.
with the
Yeah, I'm not a good fella. I'm a nice fella.
with the office of CTO at Dolby. Next to him is Gary Mandel, formerly Sony display specialist, now running a consulting operation called Out of Hand Displays. Next to Gary is Dave Van Hoy, president of Advanced Systems Group, a local integrator here in the East Bay, just down the road at Embryville.
It's
And
about time we had a meeting near the office.
that's right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. And
You're next.
and and at the end here is Steve Lampen, I'm sure most people know, formerly Belden, maybe still with Belden from time to time, and
Correct.
a great helper and consultant, and thank God for all of his work, especially in the educational area. We've got a lot of outreach going to student chapters now, so Steve is a great help on that. So the main reason for calling this meeting the NAB wrap-up was to get a sort of varying perspectives on what happened. I mean, NAB is such a mind-blowing event. It's very difficult to get a full, clear view of absolutely everything there unless you spend a month, which is almost impossible. A lot of walking is involved. I clocked up, I think, 28 miles in 4 days walking around the halls. And sure, I didn't see everything either. So I pulled this little panel together to give us some varying different views on what they felt about NAB and what they saw and so forth. So who wants to kick it off?
Well, I have a question. How many of you went to NAB?
Oh yeah, how many?
Oh, wait, yeah.
To go to NA.
Who didn't go to NAB? All right, this is for you. Yeah. No, we're going to audience participation.
Yeah.
Joel will give a great detail about what Harmonic's doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming. Yeah.
Okay. So Pat, did you actually get off the booth?
Not a lot. So as Keith mentioned, I'm the SMPTE president. We had a lot of meetings in our booth, and I could speak a little bit for Dolby. I guess to kick it off. When do we get to do a plug for our conference, though?
Oh yeah.
before we start.
Plug for the conference.
So on behalf of SMPTE as president and active member, we have a lot of our San Francisco section management here. Keith, Gary, John Scheich. No, I know who Gary is. Kent, Terry.
Matt
So,
And me.
oh,
Steve's a manager.
oh, and Steve Lampin. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. How many of you are SMPTE members? Okay, how many aren't? Why not?
Join up now.
Okay. No, because we have some guests from AES. I should, in fact, thanks to John. We do, like our friends in AES, they have a good section here, and audio, of course. Entertainment, movies without audio would be kind of boring. Audio without movies.
They used to have no audio.
Yes, yes. Audio's been a great improvement. So thank you all for coming. And I'll make one plug and then we'll kind of get into it. So for those of you in the Bay Area, there's a conference we've been doing here, now sponsored out of the San Francisco section, called Entertainment Technology. And the original thesis was bridging the gap between Hollywood and Silicon Valley, who are the new cops in town. And this year's program is 2 days. We're doing it down, sorry for you in Emeryville, down in Santa Clara at the Marriott Hotel. Joe likes that because Harmonic's right by there. And we have a great program committee. Jim Hellman, who's CTO of Movie Labs back there, is on a program committee. Michelle, who's our host, is on it. I am. We've been doing it for now our
It is the 7th year.
7th year. And this year's program, we're partnering with the Advanced Imaging Society. So we talk about it as being a conference on the art and science of storytelling. Originally, the thesis was around the internet. Now it's just a broader topic of how is technology influencing the next generation of storytelling. And so we've got a lot of topics about the technology side of it, things like volumetric video, which is the next thing coming, and then on the creative side. So the folks that are doing Toy Story 4 are going to be there talking about how they're using the technology to tell their story. So great event, very expensive. $299 for 2 days with free booze at night. In fact, we plan to have an event at HP Museum for the geeks among us. HP's 80th anniversary this year. They're hosting an event with booze, very important to me, at their museum, and we get to see Bill Hewitt and David Packard's original lab, which for me is kind of awesome. So
You mean the garage?
the garage, apparently, I don't know, I've been there, we're going to find out.
It's a historical site in Palo Alto.
There you go.
Registered. Yep.
So that's one of the events. Of course, there's some intellectual content during the day, the two tracks. So we hope, right, Keith, we're going to launch it tomorrow. And so, just check out the SMPTE San Francisco
Stay tuned.
section website. For those of you who are SMPTE members, and those who aren't, you know
Come
us.
to our website. That's
Yep.
it.
Anyone can come to our website.
Yeah.
Anyway, so enough of the commercial. Keith,
Okay.
back to you.
Okay, so you didn't get off the booth much, so
Anyway,
what's-
okay.
what's
So now
happening
back
with
to NAB. Yeah.
immersive audio and
I will tell you two things. 8K. Yay. So the best quote I heard, and if those of you know me, I love quips and sound bites. So the best quip I heard about 8K, in the debate between 4K and 8K, there is no resolution. Only proponents. Proponents.
You could only tell that joke once.
But it worked for this crowd.
That's called nitpicking.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's HDR. The other thing is, obviously in broadcast, and I've heard Reed Hastings say a couple of times, broadcast will be dead by 2030. It's just a question of how do we define broadcast in the age of the internet? What's live? What's post-produced? The distinctions are blurring very rapidly. And as ATSC, Joel's here, he's been very active in that. As broadcasting now uses IP delivery, it's really hard to tell. And it comes down, I think, more to a technology discrimination between what's live and what's post-produced. Because live is a whole different animal, and that's the next frontier. But there's nothing to say that Netflix couldn't do live. Amazon's already experimenting with it. So live is no longer the bastion of broadcast. And so what are the things that are going to differentiate? So that's a raging theme. 8K, while it was big at CES, in my view, the people that have to actually make 8K, it wasn't such a big thing at NAB. Yes, there were people out there showing it, but I think 8K is still sort of on the fence. People will do it. CE guys will do it because they can. But whether we produce content, Jim Hillman's always shaking. The studios will be the first to tell you, we can't do CGI in 4K. How the heck do you expect us to do it in 8K? And by the way, there's not enough resolution on the screens to even see that. So from the post-produced content side, 8K is still a very big question mark. You know, I think we're getting to the asymptotic point of return.
That's a question for the display guy, because if I know between HD and 4K you had to halve your viewing distance to get the effect. Do you have to halve it again? I mean, you've got to be almost right in front of the screen now to see 8K in any value?
If you follow the math, yeah. So I think I was talking with somebody about a 65-inch screen, and we were talking a viewing distance of about 1.5 feet.
Let me see. Michelle, you look so good.
Parents used to say, don't sit so close.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they were right.
Yeah. However,
boy.
I was able to see a couple of 8K displays. The majority of them was pretty obvious. They were only showing 4K content, so it was kind of There was a Sharp there that had stuff shot 8K, 120 hertz, and it was noticeably different. I don't know if it's noticeably different where you're going to spend $70,000 for a TV, but
See, Porsche or TV?
I think it's Porsche. But it did look. It did make an argument for 8K. I don't know how great an argument, but it was better.
Was it sports?
No, it was scenes. It was a lot of stuff of parks, foliage, flowers, that type of stuff.
I got to say, I do notice with the display manufacturers showing these big displays, especially the big dot matrix stuff, they're always showing either static pictures or very slow moving stuff, right? They're never actually showing you full motion and see how bad it looks in full
You
motion.
gotta be careful. It's an LCD. That's a very bad thing.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I just got to say, this is deja vu, because I remember 5 years ago, we were having the same debate about HD and 4K. And why do I need 4K? Well, because the panel makers are going to make it. But it'll be too expensive, and the panel makers made it so that the incremental cost was so low that the margin utility is, you might as well do 4K. But I used to joke the best way to compress 4K was HD. Give me it. I saw the early, well, Joel knows, the early 4K compressions. I look at the picture and say, why would I want this? It's horrible. Just because you can do it in so many megabits, the picture is crappy. And here we are again, except it's 8K now.
Content delivery, how do we get it out there? Is that part of your remit, Michelle?
Well, yes, but I was going to take my moment to speak about NAB to be a little more radical. Somebody
Go
has
for
to
it.
play
Yes,
that role.
please do.
So, even before I do that, though, another plug for Pat's conference. I'll call it Pat's conference. Something different is happening, which is Pat's made a concerted effort to bridge two worlds that are largely divided. If you don't know it, you should know it. Internet engineering today has not a lot to do with SMPTE. Not because SMPTE doesn't want that, but because the world changed a lot. And Pat's been making an effort to bridge with that community, which is largely under an umbrella called DMUXT. And he has managed to get the originator, I guess you can call him that. There's
President and CEO, he
president.
calls
He's
himself.
President and CEO, but de facto, Matt McClure, to be the keynote speaker at this conference. And I think this is quite a coup, because it's hard to bring two very binary, different cultures together, even though they really have the same technical underpinnings and objectives. I don't have to tell you, it's partly generational, it's also culture, and it's also the internet that has caused this. And I think this is going to be a really interesting first step to not only modernize, but to get these two groups leveraging each other. We kind of sit with a foot on either side here at Alluvio. I'm a SMPTE fellow. I gave my first important paper at a SMPTE conference many years ago. At the same time, the most prestigious paper I gave last year was at DMUXT. So that tells you something. And if the world's going to stay together on video technology, we need to get this bridging to happen. So now, that's also lead into my comments about NAB. NAB's got the same problem. There's a whole lot of NAB that doesn't matter at all. And I did end up most of my conference time holed up in my own suite seeing people. But what I heard from people is just this. And so I'll say a couple of things. I think the most provocative statement about NAB was the front page of the Wall Street Journal as I was flying home, which had the article about Disney Plus. What's going on right now in Hollywood is basically a race to chase Netflix, and Disney Plus is the perfect example of that. You've got the biggest, most powerful that basically aligned with Fox to make a mass arsenal to try to make a carbon copy of what is Netflix priced at $6.99 a month. What does that tell you? There is a running scared going on that is basically an arms race between companies, and it is very expensive, not to mention the fact that it is based on a copycat model. Along with that, pretty much every company I met with has a supply chain transformation project going on. So it's not like the media companies don't know that there is an economic challenge facing the whole industry in the way content is created and how it gets to consumers. On the positive side, the appetite of people for video is like it's never been before. Right? The whole world runs on video now, in every form of communication, and obviously entertainment, but through the entire fabric of life, right? So if you look at this circumstance and ask yourself, what's the place of NAB? Well, some of it is entirely irrelevant because it represents a world that doesn't really matter anymore. It's very incremental. And I will say nothing about 8K versus 4K, right, on that note. What's interesting is the fact that I think there is a point of inflection going on right now. And obviously this is why we're doing what we're doing here at Alluvio, but things have changed in a few key ways. The first is this arms race isn't sustainable. Somebody's going to run out of money. The second is the consumer position in this, when you think about how the money really flows, is mostly ad-supported models that create large-scale profits that are plowed in to finance content businesses. That's really what's been going on with the internet companies that control this, right? And that doesn't sustain very well either, for many reasons. And then the last piece is the fact that we've got so much good content and so much appetite for it, but no really efficient way to get those two bridged if it isn't, you know, really blockbuster kind of stuff. And I personally think that the motivator right now from companies is thinking back up at the supply chain level. People sense that there's a brokenness and that they can transform and make a difference. But really, I think it stems from this basic issue, which is there is an appetite, there is untapped content that is there, ready to get to people, and new experiences that are possible, but it's bound up right now with internet dollars that are hyper-financing an arms race for original content. And I think there has to be innovation to essentially break that open, right? So most of my meetings were about this kind of bigger topic, right? And when you see kind of what things we're working on, you'll understand why. I think that this is very early in this kind of tipping point that I'm getting at right now. What did all the people that met with us cared about was being able firstly to impact their supply chain problems, which mean make it more efficient, get on top of this problem, but you could tell there's kind of this undercurrent of appreciation that we're kind of locked right now in the way we look at things, with the way we do the workflows, the fact that everybody uses clouds, and that we're kind of beholden to this certain supposition of how we're going to get to market. And then machine learning and AI has changed a lot of this substantially because you can do so much with smart content in low-cost ways, right? So that has massive impact. And then I think the reorganization of edge internet, low-cost compute, and then I also think that the draw, if you will, for personalized content is kind of driving a reconfiguration of this, right? So that this is, you know, my point of view is going to be way out there, kind of what is coming next point of view, but I do think it's important to kind of acknowledge this because the NAB that we see right now with this like arsenal of stalls is not, I don't think, particularly relevant for 5 or 10 years from now. So,
How many think broadcast will be dead by 2030 as we know it? No,
Define broadcast.
the traditional over-the-air CBS, NBC,
Yes.
OTA.
Over the air,
Big stick.
because the
Yeah.
bandwidth is far too valuable.
Yep.
Other people will pay more money for it. I mean, I've been
other
to
ways
San
to get
Mateo,
it.
the College of San Mateo watched their sale of their station, and they should have just hung on to it for another 5 years, because there'll be another auction, and they would get 2 or 3 times more money. Because
That's spectrum.
bandwidth is king.
everything.
Bits or bucks.
Bits or bucks, and it's not TV, it's not audio.
There's only one spectrum until they figure out there's another.
Yes.
I just, you guys should speak. I just wanted to make one comment to Michelle's far out thinking. The other best tagline I heard at NAB was actually in our future cinema conference that SMPTE does there, and someone quipped that mobile is the new media. And I hadn't heard that before, and I said, you know, it kind of goes to this point. Distribution, which Michelle's fascinated
Involved
about,
in, yes.
but the $200 million, you know, Steven Spielberg, James Cameron model studio content, you know, if I can make a pretty interesting story, and granted, Cameron gets the money he gets because he tells good stories, but he doesn't necessarily have a monopoly on it, and technology could set us free. So I think for me, that's one of the
Technology could set us free. I agree with that.
All right.
So, given that 80% of the show is irrelevant, Dave,
was obnoxious,
of the remaining 20%, you know, it's 2110, it's 8K, it's cloud. What else is out there?
It's always interesting to listen to Michelle because she's like 5 years ahead of those of us who have to live in now.
Easy
Yeah.
to say when you're just working on the future, right?
Because I have a very different perspective because this year we took 38 people to the show,
So it's very
and all of them, all they did was walk the floor and do meetings with clients, and so looked pretty relevant from that perspective.
I get it.
And so actually what I did kind of in prep for this was something we were doing anyway, which is all of them had to post a short report on what they saw that they thought was interesting. And all of these people who work for us are all people producing content for those evil internet people, mostly. And, you know, we get a few traditional ones, but most of them are, you know, it's Vice, it's Google, it's, you know, these kinds of people. And mostly what they were after was tools to make their job work better. You know, and you know, it was interesting because mostly what they were after was 4K tools, because that's what their primary driver every day is today. And Keith has been living that with me very much. And so it was interesting to see both the maturity and the lack of maturity still in plain old 4K tools that we take for granted, like scopes. You know, try and find a portable handheld 12 gig scope. Still doesn't exist. It's you know, we take that for granted in HD. A lot of these kinds of things.
Except the younger generation would say, isn't that their smartphone?
If you can find a 12 gig input on your smartphone, that'd be awesome.
They don't know what a scope is.
It's interesting. The
So
TV Technology published at the beginning of the week their Best of Show Awards list, which is, you know, fairly extensive, and quite a lot of it is good old metal hardware. You know, there's a Bitree patch bay in here, albeit it's a Dante patch bay, but you know, there's a lot of stuff in here. Canon's lenses, you know, lighting systems. So you know, there's still a certain amount of stuff that we need to have.
I think it's the counterbalance to, you know, delivery is a big issue, and it was, you know, interesting when you were talking about it, Michelle. One of the clients we work with a lot who's doing live video that I think is an interesting challenge is Hulu, who very much has taken on and why do we do this over the air? And you go to their master control and it looks like any other knock, except that it has a Riedel intercom in it. And so down at the content producer level, which is the vast majority of who goes to NAB when all is said and done, they're still after the real brute force tools of the trade. You know, they're after cameras and lenses, and you know, they're mostly creatives. They're not us. They're not the technology people. They're there looking for tools to make the cake.
Yeah.
And so for them, NAB was remarkably relevant. And I think nothing was a better example of that. One of the things we get to do is on the Sunday before the show, we go to interminable VAR meetings, of which your ex-company was one
One of them.
one of them.
Yeah.
And so I was at one company's VAR meeting, and they put up their map of where they were going to be, and then their competitor was next door, and they named it Mar-a-Lago, which I thought was awesome. And but it was probably in square footage one of the biggest booths on the show floor. It was hard to deny that there weren't at any moment in time 1,000 people standing in the Black Magic booth. And that's an interesting testimonial to who's after creative tools and what they're paying for. that's a reality for all of us.
And
Absolutely.
just as a side note, it's interesting to see how the square footage of the Black Magic booth has ballooned over the last 5 years probably.
Got huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you can bottom feed and buy enough companies, it's amazing. And he's very, very good at it.
Yeah.
And besides, who else would produce a Ranks Intel for $30,000? But that was the big thing that came to me as I looked through all of these reports from all of our folks who work really supporting these kinds of people every day. Was the biggest thing they were after were tools to help them be
With
creative
4K.
and support systems. And I wasn't kidding that the most sought after thing that wasn't at the show was a handheld 12 gig scope. It came up in like 5 or 6 reports out of 38. And it was
So the whole thing's kind of a giant bar mitzvah.
Bada boom.
So, okay, so Steve, if we're going to go up to 8K and beyond,
Yeah.
are we going to get it down a single cable? Are we up to waveguide now? How are we going to do that?
Well, one of the things that nobody's mentioned
Rain
yet,
gutter.
which I think is interesting, is that 8K, from everything I have read, is beyond the resolution of the human eye. So that at least we're going to come to say he says no. But,
Just depends how close you are.
well, that's the thing, you say you're a foot and a half away, which obviously is clearly, so to speak.
I'm looking at Michelle in 16K right now. This is lovely.
And
But
what
then
the
again,
papers-
5/6 of us here are wearing glasses, right? So,
Yeah.
you know.
That's the thing, or we're old.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I can barely see as it is. So.
Yeah, you're the only one not wearing glasses.
But so the whole point, I think there is a stopping point to a lot of this stuff, and that then it starts to move into HDR or 3D or you tell me some other, some other direction, and fills in lots of holes that people haven't thought about for quite a while.
I saw
When you
it-
think about 8K and the relevancy of the mobile devices, where does that fit?
Well, that's the thing. And it's only one aspect, so to speak, of this huge thing we call audio, video, broadcast, whatever you're going to call it. Entertainment, And the one thing I keep thinking that I find inescapable is that we have 7 billion people, soon to be 7.5 billion people, and they're asking to be entertained and informed, and that this is a groundswell which is not going down, it's going up, it's getting stronger, and so it really doesn't matter whether we're going to do it with broadcast channels the way they are now, or internet connections, or it really doesn't matter. They're going to get what they want because there are too many people out there demanding this to happen. And it's about dollars. And when you talk about dollars, somebody's going to figure out how to make this work, how to put stuff in the package to get what these people are asking for.
Is it not a quote from Alice in Wonderland? Is I get what I like is not the same as I like what I get.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm pretty sure that the 200 millennials who work for us now like their 4K resolution phones. And because if you look at most of the phones out there, they are about 4K roughly.
And there was a big push on 5G as well. I mean, everybody's
Very much.
There was
hoping
actually
for that.
5G at the convention. You pulled your phone up.
yeah.
They actually had 5G reception there.
Well, I was on a 5G panel there.
Was
at
it
the very
certified?
end of the
I
show.
had it on my Apple when it showed up.
Yeah, that's the topic. If you want to do a SMPTE paper, the use of AI with 8K over 5G would really. We're going to grab that paper right away. We got all the buzzwords.
Yeah.
Virtual reality.
Yeah.
In virtual reality, yes.
And
Well, see,
HDR.
that's-
That-
No, who said that?
the-
Beat him up, Timo.
when I was on this 5G panel, the thing that I opened up with was the fact that I come from a broadcast background where I want to see a spec sheet. And there is no spec sheet for 5G. I mean, there's a spec sheet about spectrum and frequencies and stuff and cool things it'll do, but what's the quality of the audio or video? Oh, nobody's even interested in answering a question like that. It's good enough. Look, it's good enough. You know, and I think that's terrible. It freaks me out that I can't get a spec sheet saying here's good and bad video and here's, you know, good and bad bandwidth and good and bad stuff, because we know what that is. You know bad when you see it. You've seen bad.
Yeah, it's hard
you
to
know?
write a spec sheet around it though.
It is, but the point is that's when somebody says, well, I need a spec sheet to tell why this is not working.
But Steve, it's whatever you need. Oh, well, tell us your quality. If you need 100 megabits per second, no problem. You can have it. Just Michelle doesn't get it.
Just a second. Actually, I was going to dovetail on this. That's actually a real problem, right? So,
Yeah.
so if you want to get to video quality, which is probably a topic everybody up here can agree upon, whether you know whatever angle you're aiming for, there really are not comprehensive ways of evaluating it, right? And the problem is that we have this gap that's occurred with internet video that's now escalating because the bandwidth is so much more available and there's so many more potential offerings. Now, here's another dimension of the problem. Because now we have great AI systems that rely on scoring for training, the idea of having qualitative scoring for video quality or quantitative scoring for video quality that is really accurate and well placed is especially needed, and ironically, to allow these models to train. And yet there is not a comprehensive system by which you can evaluate video quality. There's PSNR, there are new more content relevant user perception related scales like VMAF, and then there are sort of quantitative ways through instrumentation to measure it. But to your point, there's really no framework.
You're talking about training data.
There's no framework for measuring video quality given the range of internet delivery that is going on, and in fact the innovation I think is outstripping this, and the innovation that has happened has come de facto from the leaders like, for instance, Netflix, right? And it's an opportunity for a standard. Thank
There
you,
you go.
Siobhan.
That's what we're all about.
Oh, we do that.
Yeah.
But think about, I mean, this is exactly it, where you're talking about all of these new modes of consuming video on
Searching for
mobile
standards.
over wide ranges of bandwidth, smaller bandwidth up through now the emerging 5G, right? Plus a variety of, let's say, experience modes, which can include different platforms. What constitutes good? We just had this discussion, Chris and us, earlier today on the stuff that we were meeting on. How do we know if it's good? And the final answer was look at it. Well, you can't train AI with look at it,
That's subjective. not
Right?
objective.
right?
Actually,
So,
you can.
well, you could if you get but the point being, this is an area for interesting discussion, innovation.
It makes it more complicated because it isn't just going to be something where it's a measurement at the end of the channel and you can say this is how good it is.
Of course.
Because now you've got so many dynamics. Okay, there's the image quality. Well, then the display. What is the display actually doing? So we don't measure that. What
But
is the input? What is the display process?
So you're telling me that the video people have now arrived at where the audio people have been for about 50 years?
I think that's.
But
what
if
we
the
know.
end game is the consumer experience
It's all
or the viewer's
subjective.
experience, which is what's driving all of this. I mean, the current state of the art is to rely on viewer experience and to try
Good
to create a framework where you can evaluate it, somewhat systematically using user perception. Right?
Yeah.
But the challenge is, how far does that go? How wide does it reach? And especially as what's available is changing so much, right? And honestly, there isn't a good answer at this moment in time.
And if the vast
Where are the
majority,
standards organizations when we need them?
We're actually working on one now.
You
That's
are?
better than PSNR.
You should. Why don't you speak to that, Pat? That's wonderful.
but
Well,
if
that
the
has
vast
nothing to do with
majority,
NAB,
if the
though.
vast majority of people are quite happy
did
watching,
go to
crummy cat videos on YouTube, we don't stand a chance, do
There's
we?
no such thing as a crummy
Really?
cat
No,
video.
they're
How
crummy.
dare you?
I mean, content is obviously, in that case, content
Content is king.
is king.
Yeah.
How do you define crummy?
But that's just it.
I'd
Yeah.
like to see less crummy cat videos.
In fact, there's somebody's actually released a feature film movie made up of cat videos from YouTube.
Yeah,
Did
but-
you know that? There is actually yes. Yes, there is a
But guys,
film out there.
Think of this tangible use case. So now there are sophisticated, state-of-the-art AI models that allow you to automatically up-res from one resolution to another, right? And you can do that systematically. You can train the models. Well, to get the greatest accuracy in that automatic upres, you need some way to score your results as you're training, right? We don't currently have a great system for doing that, which impairs the state of the art. And these models are so good that there is a chance that you could actually take this through basically fixing all of the crappy cat videos, right? So I think where does it relate back to my earlier comments? Imagine a supply chain where suddenly you're a company that has a mass archive you can't bring online because it's all in SD or HD, and instead everybody demands 4K or now 8K. What if you have ML techniques that could actually upres this automatically and do it for you with just compute, no other cost, no other outsourcing services, but that those ML models are impaired by the fact we don't have a good way to score in the process of training them, right? That's the kind of impact this stuff has. That's why it's important to look at. So I hope, Pat, your standards effort succeeds. Maybe you'll talk about that.
Well, the people that do encoding have been working on this problem for quite a while and coming up with some metrics. But anyway,
Well, maybe you're not going to talk about that more.
I could talk about it for a long time. But,
Yeah.
but we're here to talk about NAB.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
So
we went off of the NAB. Sorry
from the viewer's standpoint, then it's all down to that piece of glass, whether it's a small piece in your hand or it's a big one on the wall. So Gary, what's new apart from it being 8K and all the rest of it, and HDR and
Well, there was a lot of 8K. There was a lot of really bad 8K. A little bit of good 8K. But you kind of talk about 8K. What I thought was very interesting is there are a couple companies that were doing 4K displays for on camera. I'm still trying to figure out what the purpose of that was.
Well, I can tell you that.
Sorry?
I can tell you that. I can answer that question.
Yeah, I can answer that.
There's, putting displays on set is a huge deal.
Yes.
Making them look good is really hard.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the right colorimetry and the right controls, and the ability to synchronize the raster,
Then you gotta go
you
fix
get
it in
icky
post.
stuff all the time.
Well, I agree with that. However,
That's a SMPTE term, by the way,
looking at a
icky stuff.
10-inch
It's
4K
normative
monitor
reference.
that sells for $1,000, I don't think is going to get you there.
No.
And that was 4K monitors in 10-inch, 7-inch, and 5-inch for on-camera stuff, which I thought was, okay, I'm not really sure where they were going. But it seemed like a big part of what the monitor manufacturers were doing were going in this direction, in very small, high-resolution monitors. And also the other side of it was very high-brightness monitors.
Oh, HDR.
I suppose the answer with that is
Not HDR, just high brightness.
you know, if you got a 4K camera and you got a 4K output from it, you don't have to downres it to show it on the little monitor you got on the side of the camera, right? You can
It's not, yeah,
see it native.
well, I kind of did a comment of how close do you need to be. I mean, if I got a 7-inch monitor at 4K, I mean, quite literally, I'm going to be at this. It does me any benefit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people do it every day.
Well, they do, but they're not doing video. You're not.
I'm just saying. Be careful where you stick that.
Okay. All right. I just was having a hard time.
Yeah, I know.
One thing that was very interesting is Plura Broadcast had a 22-inch OLED that was using a new OLED technology from Japan Display Industries. It's a 22-inch RGB OLED, but it's using a lithography process. Yeah. Which was and they were selling it. It was delivering.
Price?
Price, they didn't give me a price. Pricing on everybody was pretty tough. My guess is it's probably somewhere in the 10K range, somewhere in that.
It'll be $9.99 by Christmas.
It'll be on the deal.
if they get the yield up.
Something else that was kind of interesting is the number of monitor manufacturers showing an NAB versus the number of video wall manufacturers was changing drastically. A lot of monitor manufacturers were not at NAB this year, tons of them, which was very interesting. And a lot of them, even the Chinese companies, didn't show up.
Too commoditized to make it worthwhile.
Yes, yeah. It just, the prices are just dropping. In the video wall side of things, a lot of mini LEDs. No micro LED yet, but a lot of mini LEDs using chip-on-board types of technologies, which was really interesting.
So sub 1 mil.
Subwood mill. Actually, I saw all the way down to 0.7, which was very interesting. There was one company, Call Ender Display, which was using modules with using mini LEDs. It was only 47 millimeters deep. So you're talking that deep, which was, and didn't look wonderful, but it wasn't bad. I mean, if you have a space problem, it would work very well. On the monitor side, going back to the monitor side, on the reference monitors, the big thing now was dual cell. And this is a new LCD technology. Essentially, what they do is it's two LCD panels laminated together. And you have one panel in the back, which is a luminance modulator, and then the panel on the front is the RGB. And you can do pretty good blacks on it. So EZO, Flanders, Postium, all are showing.
Your alma mater, aren't they using that now?
They're using parts of it.
That's
They
what
want to
they-
talk about it.
Is that
Sony's
what-
also has a version of
Is
it.
that what their 310, their
HX
reference
310.
monitor is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't want to get on the Sony wagon. The other companies are using
Well,
the full.
I thought it was an interesting shift because they'd attempted to do that level of colorimetry for mastering with OLED, and the whole reason they're walking away is they can't get the yields and the reliability.
They can't. They do get pretty good yields. However, to make that panel, the OLED panel, takes 2 days. And I don't want to get off track too much. The cost of doing that panel was just so much for what it has to do that it just ended up not being reasonable. And they actually shifted all of that technology over to making cell phone panels.
Making cell phone panels.
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
hear that?
Because that's where.
That's where the money is.
That's where the
Yeah.
money is.
Absolutely.
Mobile's the new media, you heard it here.
Yeah, and that's where that went.
Hmm.
Other things. Let's see, a lot of high brightness, a lot of 8K.
Lot of
Yeah, what about HDR?
Gary,
HDR, everybody already has it.
NHK usually has something cooking in their booth. Did they have anything there this year?
I didn't get by NHK at all.
NHK.
It was all
They had
AKA.
8K.
That's it?
The other thing about 8K too, NHK is following it, but they've started up, Chris Chinook has started up this 8K consortium, and they're starting to pull people together to promote 8K, and NHK of course.
They were showing a LG monitor about this thick.
Uh-huh,
I don't remember the technology.
white OLED. Yeah.
Well,
It's white OLED.
And 8K, I think 120 megabits. Really, casino wrestlers were in your face. And
I'm
we
kind
didn't
of
want them any closer.
kind of going on back of this, when people were building HD panels, LCD panels, the transition from LCD to 4K, it took about 3.5, almost 4 years for the cost to teeter, where it was cheaper to make a 4K panel than it was an HD panel. They're thinking now it's going to be less than 3 years to go from a 4K panel to an 8K panel. So you're going to, like an 8K TV right now is going to be in the $70,000, $50,000 range, somewhere in there. In 3 years, you're going to see sub $1,000 versions of that.
Also some very impressive footage of Versailles and France during a costume ball. You really got that feeling of presence.
I think a lot of that too is also high frame rate stuff.
And
I saw a
HDR.
lot of it.
Yeah.
And
And the
HDR.
HDR.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't take away HDR.
They actually had, I think NAK actually did have a full transmission path, right? The transmitter and receiver doing that 8K at 120 frame, just to prove that you can actually do it over the air.
What was the data rate?
I don't recall.
Was it 70 or something?
Yeah.
Did anybody see that?
I think it was, I read the paper actually, I think it was about 50 megabits.
50,
Mm.
that sounds
NEC was out there with a projector, the NC2402ML, where laser projector, where they could take the laser, it was an interchangeable module now. So instead of having to go through the alignment and a major repair, you could actually just unplug the
Yourself.
module.
like NASCAR.
Several of the new projector companies are doing that,
Yes,
Yeah, that was very
that's
cool.
cool.
especially at 4K. It's cool.
Yeah, Ovide Smart, which was interesting. It was actually, it was kind of amazing. Has the Assist 2 EVO and the 4 EVO, which are recorder monitor combinations, where you can display either 2 or 4 cameras on one screen. The 4 EVO can take in up to 128 cameras if you want it. If you want to switch, it'll route and record, and it'll do all that stuff. I'm not sure of a program that's going to be doing that, but I thought that was pretty
Surveillance.
Surveillance.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Maybe that's what it. Yeah, it's more of it. They were designing more like an on-set type of display.
Big Brother.
Yeah. A lot of wireless monitors for on-camera stuff.
I'm curious, one thing that I think is super topical for you that I'm curious if you got any insight into was typically, we wouldn't see a tremendous amount of very large display at NAB. That's kind of not the forte there. It's more about content production, more about that side. Yet there was a tremendous amount of large display there this year.
Yeah.
And I was trying to kind of think through why is that? Why is it here? Normally I'd see it at Infocom or Digital Signage Expo or something like that. And as we're working in venues, it seems that we're seeing it on set more, that it is becoming the background in more and more instances. And I wondered if that was what was driving those manufacturers to be at NAB as opposed to more traditional display shows.
I think that's probably the first thing that's driving them. I think the other thing on the horizon is you're going to start seeing direct emissive displays going into the cinema. And I think people will have, DCI just put out more of a comment on what people thought about specifications and what was possible with direct emissive displays.
Excuse me, butting in, that reminds me that one of the interesting things I saw on the Ikegami stand is they have, from the 4K camera, the ability to, in software, cut out a 9:16 window. So you can mount your screen in portrait mode, and without having to do any sort of fancy DVE type moves, just feed it straight out the camera in the right raster.
Wow, that's interesting.
That was kind of slick, I thought.
Interesting.
It is interesting. But yeah, I think you're right. The broadcast on-set stuff is probably the biggest motivator right now.
So one thing you didn't mention that we actually had an Adobe booth from a company called, not Atmos, but Atomos, for those you're familiar, was an on-set reference display. Because if you're shooting in HDR, one of the things people are finding, whether it's live or even in for movie content, that because the dynamic range is so high, having a confidence monitor to make sure you're in the right range with the camera adjustment is necessary. And there really hasn't been a good one. And Atomos has this 12-inch display that supports HDR. They were actually using in a booth because for the first time, HD, forget 8K, we can't even do 4K right, and let alone 4K with HDR and high frame rate. So to the point, I think the tools are beginning to finally show up. And regardless of how we deliver it, I think one of the takeaways is that we still need ways to make the content, and the tools are evolving as the quality of the technology, of the content itself is improving.
Yeah, but ironically, Atomos is a bunch of defectors from Blackmagic. And actually, I think Keith and I actually had a fair amount of experience with this the last year or so, which was very interesting. One of the venues that we work in has a very large Sony CLED wall, which has a native resolution of 16K, and everything we're feeding it is 4K. But one of the clients, one of the first things they asked us was, so what's the native resolution of this? And we said 16K, and they said, if we gave you 16K content, could you show it? And we're like, no, but it's interesting because, especially when you get into large venue, and you're dealing with millennials coming up through the internet. The concepts of what these resolutions mean in creative are pretty much meaningless. They'll try anything, and so it's driving a lot of interesting transmission questions and things that are not. Let's just say nobody in NAB was addressing very well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges. It's all very well to produce this stuff, but how do you actually get it to the consumer?
Even within a single room.
Yes. I mean, ATSC 3.0, I see your put your badge on there, very nice.
I'm curious if anybody saw any
adoption of IMF in production tools, editing, etc.
No.
Obviously,
But I saw-
Netflix is still.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think in all the technology conferences I've been involved in, every customer that I saw, I think that it is taking hold by necessity, right? And it's working its way through the whole supply chain. That's why I was curious to hear. And I think a lot of the software tools and asset management tools are being extended, modified, made, innovated to basically work with it natively. Right, and so I was curious also on storage file systems.
That's about the only place where they're talking about it that I saw. It's the content management folks.
Yeah.
Does everyone know what IMF is in the audience? It's not the International Monetary Fund.
I'm a Cinesert, so this is in our wheelhouse. Our booth was nonstop.
Yeah.
That was the busiest NAB we've ever done, so.
Interesting.
And everybody knows, IMF, your tool's supported, I heard I need to come talk to you.
Yep.
What do you have, what does it cost, et cetera, so.
What did you see as far as people's interests?
So there's a lot of interest with, so there's kind of this range of people who know something about IMF. And
What is it, Dean? Could you?
Interoperable mastering format. It's a, if you understand what an EDL is.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
they do component-based media asset management. So you get, instead of a flat file, you end up with a reference to a set of track files, and you can put edit decision lists in the reference. And the goal, of course, is to do edits and not make a new flat file for every change that you make.
Not a database.
And a little more context. It's a SMPTE standard. It was originally driven out of the studios because, and it started, and Dean Bullock back there who did a lot of the work on this, but it was driven out of a need by Disney. When they make a major movie like Frozen, they got to the point where they made 30,000 versions of that movie. 30 languages, international distribution, different edits, subtitles, and it just became unmanageable. And the idea was, what if we had a way that the video assets, to be, we call it essence in SMPTE, the audio, all the different soundtracks, the subtitles, all could be kept as separate tracks, and then depending on the deliverable, where we have a thing called composition playlist, you say, this is the version for Italy with subtitles, and this set of edits, boom, 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 push the button, there's your deliverable. And so IMF, interoperable mastering format, was a way to create all those assets in a way that you could literally do like McDonald's and just pick and choose what version you need to do. And so,
So back to your experiences about your booth, what was the traffic level when people were asking about it?
Well, so there's this range of people who are working with Netflix, so that it's absolutely apparent that the driving force here is Netflix vendor workflow chain. Right? You work with Netflix, you need to check your IMF box, right?
because that is their mastering process these
Right.
days.
Deliveries coming into Netflix need to at least look kind of like IMF looked a couple of years ago. So that's where it comes from. But there's also a whole range of people who hear the acronym and think it's important. So I hosted a lot of meetings with people who do who sell storage and have, can I take your app and put it on my storage item? Right? I'm like, well, who are you and what do you mean by storage and that kind of stuff. So it's driven by Netflix, right? It's driven by this desire for people to deliver into Netflix, and then they go to meetings and someone says IMF and they go look it up online.
So is that from the point of view of their wanting to create?
I'm sorry?
Was that from the point of view of them wanting to create content-aware storage platforms?
No, these are people, so that group of people are companies that are looking for value-add logos to add to their brochure. So I sell this storage platform and it supports IMF because I happen to
Because you can store bits.
Yeah.
Yeah, IMF ready.
You can say what you have, but there's a lot of profit in these companies.
I get
Guys,
it.
to bring it a little more forward, so I think obviously Netflix took a leading position around this a few years ago and kind of mainstreamed it into the minds of workflows. The unique property, like Pat said, is that it is effectively self-versioning and composable by definition. Now, and you'll see if you come talk to me, I mean, we've used it as a native internal representation in the content fabric because it's kind of the ideal marriage for compositional distribution, right? So the reason I brought it up is because I have seen a very clear tipping point in the serious adoption of it through both, companies and workflows. It's still relatively early on, but there's nobody that we're working with that hasn't embraced it in spades as their sort of next generation content format for, at least for storage, and in our view, it should be all the way through the.
So every one of our digital cinema clients is working on IMF, taking it slowly, thinking about what it means in terms of cost, and there's a lot of operator training, and frankly, the tooling around IMF is still, I wouldn't say it's amateur hour, but it requires a lot of kind of IT skill to put it all together and make it work, the current tooling in place.
Yep.
So are there plans for Premiere Pro to support it?
Oh, I don't know. That's another question.
Are there plans for Premiere Pro to support IMF?
That's when it's gonna tip,
Well,
when it reaches that level.
Telestream was actually showing something. I didn't see
Yeah,
it in the
let's get
You
the
guys brought up
Telestream.
Black Magic earlier. You guys brought up Black Magic is taking over a quarter of an entire South Hall floor, right? So they support IMF.
Just
So
the lower floor.
Lower floor.
Upper floor's next.
I wouldn't say, in fact, I would argue that if there's a company who's not supporting it, they're gonna get bypassed. Because people who want to make content, to put it on the
Well, but-
frankly most popular platform on the planet right now,
yeah, but
have to use
I
it.
was going to say, I'm going to be very
The most popular
irritating
platform, they need
in
it on
saying
YouTube?
this, but think about the elephant issue, right? It all got driven by this very phenomena that, the whole traditional world doesn't want to acknowledge, which is that all of this came out of Netflix, and the fact that they're basically taking the sort of leading edge of IT and applying it to content production all the way through. And my point was that, okay, that's a reality, get with it, but how do you go past that, right? Because right now, if you look at what the result of that is, you have a situation where the economics of that require that you spend your way into that. I mean, even they are chewing through enormous amounts of cash to try to get on the entertainment side of this. And my point is, there is something else beyond that.
Is that why they put my subscription price up this month?
Yeah.
Well, look at it.
We're
Look
trying
at
to
the
pair
debt.
with revenue though, not.
Well, right now, I mean, I think it's a foregone conclusion to say that that style of IT innovation is necessary to even be competitive. That's just a fact, right? But then you ask yourself, what is that leading to? And right now, it is a huge amount of cash spent on original content production that is being sustained by stock prices. And the question is, what is not experienced in the world of content as a result of this, and where is it going to stabilize? I mean, world always moves forward. Lower cost, more and more diversity of upside. Right?
There was quite a large chunk of the South Hall, I can't remember if it was upstairs or downstairs, which was all software related to workflow and metrics and all the rest of it, which is clearly the way it's going.
Oh, analytics. That's another
Yes.
actually interesting point that I was going to ask about. If anyone, surely people have seen lots and lots around data, right?
But we
That's
see
it.
it around we see it at the platform levels and at the content management levels. But to use an old quote, the great unwashed, who the content creators, no knowledge, it's the distributors are the people who care about the analytics.
It's the distributors and the advertisers, right? I mean, the creators, as long as it goes out there, and if they're getting some back end residuals coming back in, that's great. But it's really the advertisers and
Well, and that's an interesting point too, especially when you have so much user-generated content and how they're working to monetize that. Because for all the analytics, it's interesting. Netflix touts their analytics and that's part of their big success. And I think they can do that because they have paid content, that's their platform or their basis, and they have control over the content on the platform. And which is key. Whereas YouTube on the other side states very publicly that with all of Google's compute and all of Google's AI today, they can still only predict with a 2% accuracy what videos will go viral and what won't.
2%.
2%.
And it's I was reading a report, I think it was earlier today, that they are struggling in YouTube because there's so many different language versions now. Is not only the AI side of it, but even the human monitoring side of it. You've got to have everybody speaking every single language, watch all this stuff to see whether it's good or bad. In terms of, whether it's content that can be put out there or
It's not a
should be
good month to be
removed.
Susan Wissmeet, that's for sure. It's tough. And so and that I think is a very interesting point as it relates to NAB and the content creation world. We in this group love to talk about Netflix and paid content and all of that, but the vast majority of the content being created in reality is going out over Facebook Live, over YouTube, over platforms that are, as you said, all advertising driven.
Yes.
And so around the circle.
Digital advertising driven.
Yeah.
Another very interesting little thing I saw, actually was on the backside of the Vitec booth, is this company that have a software set up for one-man journalist operations using iPhone 7.
Yeah.
And you put your phone on this little tripod thing, and you hit the remote button, and it connects you back to their bureau, and then they can control the camera, the brightness, the focus, everything on the camera. You just stand in front of it and do your piece, and it just streams it back into the bureau, and off you go.
Imagine what 5G will offer you.
Yeah, but the great thing with that, of course, is if you're in somewhat dodgy areas, you don't want somebody ripping your big camera off the tripod and running away with it.
You mean like Oakland?
Everybody's got a phone.
No, Emeryville.
What was the manufacturer?
It's actually a news agency, FSN I think they're called, but it's their software, but they're now selling it as normally they'd sell it as a service to news producing
I thought LiveView was
companies.
offering that service as well,
Right.
with their technology.
And do you realize that gives you, if you're a little tiny station, you can have 10,000 people in the field working for you.
Right. All you got to do is have an app downloaded onto your phone, and you become a journalist.
You're the first with every news thing
Yeah.
that ever happened. Ever.
This guy was showing me, he pulled up his master control screen. He's got listed people in Singapore and all around the world. He could just
Absolutely.
schedule them a thing, go to this place, run this story. Here's the slug for it, and connect when you're there, and back it comes.
In 4K?
Who knows?
So I have a question. How many go to Infocom in this group? No, less. So you're more NEBers. So the
Not the
interesting-
Florida version.
Yeah. So my question to this group, back to the Reed Hastings and broadcasting is dead. However we want to define it, I just see a growing proliferation of demucks, for example. We were just talking about that. There are more and more events, more and more fragmentation, and it's hard for people to get their mind share. I agree with the point that no matter what happens, it's a good time to be in the content creation business because there's more and more desire for content, and the tools of content creation are advancing. But I'm curious, do folks think that NAB will be around in 10 years or will be replaced by something else?
I think you're going to see manufacturers not wanting to pay the price.
Well,
And
to
you're
those...
seeing that now with Infocom. Some of the biggest manufacturers have left Infocom because of money.
Yeah, and to
Spending
the...
that money to go out locally.
There's another problem, which is culture. If you are on the bleeding edge, it's viewed, I hate to say it, but passé to be in a stand on a show floor in a big house warehouse.
The rotating rust head error.
Um,
And to those who... yeah, if you remember videotape recorders, they're basically a rotating rust head. That's the big iron era, which is going away.
Cultural reference.
Yeah. Those of us who remember when there used to be rotating rust head tape?
There's also another fact that was interesting this year. I mean, some of you probably know Google Next, the cloud conference, was held the same week as NAB. Either Google unintentionally did that, not caring at all about the media market, or Google intentionally did it. Make that point, right? or both, right? Depending on who you are within Google. But to Pat's point, I mean, I really think that the balance has shifted to the networking and the thematic elements and away from the. But of course, as Dave just pointed out, and as you just pointed out about your booth, you had the highest traffic ever. So I mean,
And actually, this was the second highest attended NAB ever.
ever. So and
You know,
there's
so-
tons of people there. So my comments about this may not be factual.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I was wondering similar things because I have the privilege of working with many hundred millennials,
Yep.
and wondering if any
What
of
they
them,
would think.
any of them would ever go to NAB.
Do they all go?
Hundreds and hundreds of them,
Well, there you go.
and you know that
But they're content people.
they're content
Yeah.
people.
But it's interesting to see,
Not all of them. A lot of
isn't it?
them.
It's interesting to see over the years, and you know, I've not been to as many NABs as some other people. I spoke to Larry Thorpe. He said this was his 57th NAB or something ridiculous. But the you know the
That would be 7 too many.
he started when he was 12, right? Okay, but
You got all the badges from up here.
that's right. But over the years, there's certainly a shift between the all-male, certain age demographic to a lot more female, which is good, and a younger demographic too. There's a lot more.
We had a very large number of attendees from Facebook, Google,
and
Yeah.
such, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you know, it was a major shift that these people are going.
Yep.
But part of that is because they're using traditional broadcast gear to do their
Geared to
content
do their
creation.
content
That's right.
creation.
You know,
Yeah.
it's still a camera, and
You
it's
need a
still
camera.
still microphones. It's still,
Well, I mean, one of the things that still amazes me is if you'd asked me 10 years ago if we'd be installing 2 multiple ME switchers in venues a month,
Yeah.
I'd have just laughed at you all day long.
Yeah.
And yet here we sit,
Yep.
installing 4 a month of, you know, not little black magics.
Yep.
And
Well,
yes.
maybe the distinction is on just that, which is literally what is considered classic state-of-the-art AV equipment versus the world I live in, which is one of software, right? Maybe that's the difference, right? I
Well,
don't know.
I think actually it's kind of both in the sense that the appetite for live created content is greater than I can remember since
Ever.
the
Yep.
Was
60s.
attendance up this year or down this year?
So is that.
So it was up.
It was up by 5,000.
Exhibitors
So
could
what
not
was the
get
final
booths.
tally?
91?
Exhibitors
91.
that were not able to get booths and wanted to buy booths.
Yeah.
And ended up having to go to the local hotels and so on instead. They would normally would have an NAB booth. And I would argue that NAB has evolved over the last few years so that, you know, it's
Far more
not just
relevant.
TV broadcasters by any means. It's video content producers.
It's anybody who makes
Less
content.
radio.
Well,
less broadcast in some
and
ways.
again, I'm not trying to be a naysayer, but I will tell you the most senior CTO I met with in the whole thing said that he's only spent a day there, but he said it was boring. And when he met with me, and I mean, we were talking, he asked me this very, so I mean,
So the
facts are
next-
facts.
yeah.
It's just that there is something you feel when you're starting something new that suggests that that format, which is what Pat said, is a bit passé. That said, obviously there's a lot of people going, and more so than ever before. So maybe we have to tease it apart.
So it's a question of where the focus is. So the running joke was, what's the best way to be a $400 million broadcast equipment manufacturer?
Be a billion. Start with a billion.
Start with $1 billion,
Yeah.
and that is the declining trend. And I was just looking, you know, I don't know how many of you went to Amazon Web Services reInvent, 43,000, right? Half of NAB, Amazon only, you know, and Apple's got their thing going on too. So this is my point about the fragmentation and being pulled. The demux generation, which is quite problematic, and Michelle is dragging me into it, kicking and screaming. But they went from 0 to 7,000 members worldwide in 4 years, and they started as a bunch of San Francisco coding geeks.
Meetup.
They don't care. Yeah, they don't have
Meetup,
meetings.
yeah.
They have
Meetups.
mashups. They don't. They eschew authority, right? So it's a.
They're not that different than this. There's pizza, beer, and a technical talk in a
Yeah.
small venue,
Right.
right? This is a meetup. You just don't call it that.
On the content creation side, there's still going to be a ton of activity.
Yeah.
Always.
Cameras, all
production,
this.
editing, all
Yeah.
that stuff.
That's the glamorous part.
It's the Grass Valleys of the world,
Well,
Yep.
thank you.
and the people like that are going to be attacked more by big tech.
Yeah.
Okay, since you mentioned that, now I want to take this.
No, I
in
think
Did you
a
give him
different
$5
direction.
for that?
It's a
Go
very good
ahead.
And because I was in the Grass Valley Belden booth for a lot of my time, and which is literally
Cheers.
across the way
Yeah.
from Black Magic, you understand, which is like #1 here tonight in terms of mentions. And the one thing walking through the Black Magic booth that I cannot help but think is that it would be cheaper to throw this stuff away when it stops working than it is to fix it. Firstly, I don't think it's possible to fix it, technologically possible to fix it. You don't have the tools and facilities to do it, or would you want to buy them anyway? And so you're going to throw this stuff away, and I think this is, in fact, where we're heading with almost everything, every piece of hardware. Hardware is turning into something that is unfixable because it's so cheap, and it's so technologically impossible to deal with unless you're some kind of weird specialist.
Unless we start taxing the trash, the electronics trash.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and I think
They have to be really
in fact,
expensive tax at this point.
I actually spoke at the beginning on the Saturday before NAB about this, that I think what's eventually going to happen in the server world is that the robot pulls out the bad server, it gets ground up.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding, this is not a joke. It gets ground up, separated into metals and plastics, and goes back into the factory to turn into the next server, because that thing is already a year old, it's out of date. So they don't want to make that one work even if they could fix it. They're going to turn it into the server of tomorrow as fast as they can. And I think this is where we're heading in terms of all
Hardware.
physical,
It's a-
mechanical stuff.
Yeah.
Is
Commodity
grind
market.
it up and make a new one.
Yeah.
And we've heard this time and time again. I mean, leading people in the industry that hardware is a boat anchor, right? So you put your stuff in the cloud, you have your virtual, operation center. It still doesn't mean you don't need good quality acquisition. So there's always going to be a place, but
Right.
the model is changing, as we see with the DMUX, from a hardware-based world that many of us grew into a software-based one.
But Dave said something interesting about the cameras and the attendants there, because I just thought, that guy sitting right back there in the polo shirt, Shaban Simu, who doesn't know anything about cameras. He went shopping for cameras. Why? Because he wanted to understand the whole acquisition side, and because of what Dave said, if you're involved in these internet platforms with video, you're dealing with everything else except for acquisition, and suddenly you got this problem where you've got to get high quality content into this thing, and you've got to figure out how to do it. You did exactly what David said.
Tell me about that.
Surprise.
I don't want to. I want to make sure we're not skipping this the topic of 2010. Is there any remarkable?
2010.
Yes.
Does everyone know what 2010? It's a SMPTE standard.
It's a SMPTE standard.
One of the ones that was actually on boxes this
Not a
time.
year.
Yeah.
Right.
2110.
2110. Yeah, we have there, yeah.
Okay, now I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's okay, he was the internet guy, we're
It's
going to
another
skip it.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was-
Yeah.
They just drop one bit,
But the way I would define, I think, at that point, the way I'm thinking, if you think about the death of broadcast, I'm thinking of unplugging the last SDI cable. So, hence my.
We have a lot of clients who want to do that, and every time they do that, they find out it's cheaper to plug in an SDI cable. So one of these days
Yeah.
one of these days that will flip,
There's no
Yeah.
copyright.
but not yet.
Yeah, the
here's the
uptick
Secure
on
digital interface.
the uptick on building a 2110 facility, a complete facility, all 2110, is about 25 to 30% more than doing it in SDI right now.
A simple fact. If you understand why this matters, then good for you. Andy Beckelstein, did I say his name right? The famous Andy was on a panel at the Devoncroft event this year. That has never happened before. Why does this matter to this whole discussion about broadcast over IP? Because of Arista. And what does that mean? When Andy, go look up, if you don't know who Andy is, go to Wikipedia tonight and read. Then you will understand what I mean. When Andy is in the Devoncroft panel, Andy Beckelstein from Stanford and one of the richest investors in the world, and we just go read. Sun founder, did I say his name right? Andy, yes. When he's on the Devoncroft
I know
panel,
lots of Andys.
you know that something has changed about video over IP.
What was he saying about Arista then?
Well, why was he there? I mean, he owns Arista. He founded Arista, right? But that's the point. You would never have before to get Andy, I have to go to Stanford, to a computer science conference, to something in the bleeding edge of graduate school, or to Silicon Valley, Sand Hill Road. That's how I get Andy. I have never, when I saw Andy was at NAB, I was like, okay, my two worlds have combined and come together. You get it? Like, this is a big deal.
You go to a device for 2110 support for all levels of 2110.
Of course, but it's the fact of, this is one of the fathers of the internet and system computing and Unix. Andy is now at the Devoncroft event. That's important.
Andy Beckelsheim, who co-founded Sun Microsystems in '92, is one of the founders of
Wrote the
Arista.
check to found Google.
Oh, and he's worth 432 million, in case you
Beckelsheim
wonder.
Was the hardware engineer
At
behind
least.
Sun Microsystems. He was the person who designed the Sun engineering.
He wrote the check to the Google guys that got
It
them
doesn't-
going,
doesn't
guys.
matter. That doesn't matter. He designed.
I understand,
the
but
hardware. Google's not the important part.
well, yeah, exactly, the whole
In
thing,
terms of
right?
Andy Beckelsheim, Google's not the important.
Yeah.
What happened to Sun
But
Microsystems?
that's kind of the point of it all, right?
Oracle bought them.
So,
I know.
to Sherban's question about what's happening with IP, right?
They're funding racing yachts now.
So can a non-board member talk about now? Okay. I wrote a few things down.
Oh, here we go.
Excuse me for a moment.
Get the beer out.
I'm a student member. I am not an official member. My background is IT. I was a web farm wrangler. I actually managed how do you make 1,000 machines work together. And so I have a lot of familiarity with web architecture. I'm also a 2110 evangelist. It's like, I have followed specs for a long time, and 2110 is the first spec that's come out of a professional organization that sounds open and accepting.
And works.
And well, we haven't learned that yet, but it's working so far. Now, the three things I really got from NAB, the other thing is I'm a YouTube creator.
Oh.
So I'm one of the weird people off to the side who's got a
You and your 50 billion friends.
camcorder trying to create media.
Funny cats.
And actually,
Is your
how-to
stuff good?
videos and house concert videos. But the first thing is that the Chinese are eating our lunch.
In what
At
area?
the conference, for a YouTube creator, the Chinese had booths about lighting. They had a second booth about infrastructure. The Koreans had a booth. They were showing high quality, lower cost products. I mean, I'm retired, so I can't afford to buy any of this stuff, but I would be very attracted to buying that stuff. The second thing is that, well, this camera, what's that text? Actually, I'm missing that one. The other one is for China. They were also talking about 10G to the home.
10G. They skipped 5.
10G to the home. They had a booth that.
Huawei has 10G, not 5G. Then
Well,
you need to know that.
They are driving the future, and we should be concerned about that as Americans. Or embrace it. The other thing about this show was that 2110 was invisible. I mean, there was a 2110 Expo, and I must admit I was totally disappointed because I had hoped to go and see a bunch of little sub booths showing interoperability of how you could make this work in your studio, and there were a series of talks. And if I was excited about 2110, the talks were great. But if I was an executive or somebody entering the field, thinking about 2110, kicking the tires, it was virtually invisible.
Depending on where you were looking, if you would have gone to South Upper Hall.
If I had gone to certain booths or certain things, I would have had to look for it. But
Away from the Rust Belt to the South
Pat,
Hall.
you have to work on
The other thing is 4K, 8K. The whole issue I have with 4K, 8K is that capturing 8K is easy, displaying 8K is easy,
Everything
getting
in
it from
between.
point B to point A, point B.
It
I'm an
doesn't
IT guy, and when I started doing video, and I do a 30 frame per second 4-camera shoot, and it's 35 gigabytes of data. And I hate to say it, but that's a non-trivial amount of data. And if you're talking about computers and what you can afford, I'm a Linux user, and I must admit I tried to install DaVinci, and then I went and looked at the requirements for a Linux installation, and they want a $20,000 workstation, they want a $20,000 file server, they want a $20,000 network infrastructure, they want $20,000 rendering engines, and it was like, I'm just a Linux user, and
But the software is free.
But it's free. Actually, and I must admit, for companies on the show, on the floor, giving your software away for free for introductory people is actually a good thing for them.
But
anyway,
just to argue your point for just a second about 2110, I would say that all of the major manufacturers, and I could talk about Grass Valley, I could talk about Ross, I could talk about Sony, I could talk about Panasonic, I could talk about Lavo, I could talk about Nebion, I could talk about EVS, etc., Evertz. They all have interoperability with SMPTE-2110. They all have this available to their equipment.
It was a station in the booth,
it may
and if
be
you knew what you were asking for,
I think this year they were focused on showing esports.
that's okay.
They did 2110 last year, but they have 2110 and it does work. So
No, it does. It's
imagine. So
it's
there's
hard. I mean,
companies, and they are
2110 is a
delivering
hard
2110.
technology to demo because
It's a hard it is a hard technology to demo.
So just in sort of wrapping up, because I want to make sure everybody has a chance to see Michelle's demo as well.
You don't have to.
Quick trivia question. Quick trivia question. Then, what is SMPTE-2100?
New standard.
Crickets. I learned this one having gone to a paper on database in the cloud, and the next paper on in that particular group was this professor who stood up to talk about SMPTE-2100, which is the standards for haptic. And his notion was that sort of a piece of newspaper from 10 years into the future of a viewer who was suing the National Football League because the haptics on his suit watching the Super Bowl were turned up too high and he broke his back. So, that's an interesting one. I didn't even know 2100 existed until I heard this. But yes, there is a set of standards for VR haptic gloves and all the rest of it. So the haptic suits.
Not metadata?
Yeah, it's like there's going to be a Carmack for haptics to stop you cranking the thing up too much.
Well, before we adjourn, Keith, I guess to the audience, are there questions you have for the esteemed panel?
Or observations about NAB that you want to share.
Yeah.
Who's Steve?
Go ahead.
From the back.
Yes.
So, I'm Joanna, and I work with content makers making documentaries for PBS. So they are sometimes have access to great equipment, but also, we have a whole film that was shot only on phones that had 50 different frame rates because phones apparently their frame rate they record slows down as the battery of the phone is higher.
We call that variable frame rate.
29.6.
Anyway,
Going once, going twice.
29.3.
it is interesting because we talk about sort of filmmaker sustainability as them and can you make a career actually being a documentary filmmaker, but also how to navigate how to help them navigate different distribution channels, being smart about their own distribution model of documentary content. But just wondering, going from NAB, the technical, being that you're also talking about changing landscapes and changing distribution models. I was just interested, you talk about the content creators, but just how you guys see that if you were a filmmaker, particularly a doc filmmaker that has the least amount of resources, was there any trends at NAB or what you guys are seeing that would be advice to them?
What's film?
Well, if you come to my demo,
Yeah.
you'll see that some of us are working on ways to really disrupt the cost of doing this. But it goes through the whole chain, and hopefully the beneficiary is the creator and also the viewer or the person experiencing the entertainment, and also the sponsor, because after all, it's part of the monetization of this. So I think there are radically beneficial opportunities around this, and I also think they can be high quality, which is where a lot of low-cost solutions have fallen short.
Well, when you think about 8 megapixels, right? We're talking about 8K. So I think that the technology, and I often use the analogy, you talk about simply being the art and science of storytelling, and the analogy I use is Leonardo da Vinci couldn't have painted the Mona Lisa without canvas and paints, right? We create the paints, and the paints and the canvas are no good without Leonardo da Vinci. So you've got that next generation of budding Leonardo da Vinci's, and the technology, in a sense, is setting us free. You know, Resolve's editing systems are, you know, a fraction of the price. You know, these kind of devices, as you're already showing, you can tell pretty dang good stories, right? So it gets back to empowering the creative. So in that sense, I think it's a great time, because we're talking about to be a content creator, because there's a greater and greater desire for good stories, regardless of where they come from. So, you know, I think Jim Cameron needs to be looking over his shoulder, but great storytellers will still make money, right? Just like great authors, but
I think it's very true, Pat. You know, if the story is compelling enough, you kind of can glom over the technology part of it.
Yeah,
you know,
and the better the technical, the better the story becomes. So,
not
always.
Not always. Yeah.
Sometimes technology is used as an excuse for the story, but
Yeah.
we've seen both sides. But I always joke, the great thing about, you know, remember, I guess I'm showing my age, those remember Rodney King? I used to joke, you know, content is king. That story was shot with a VHS camcorder at night. It was crap, but everyone wanted to see it because
and we saw it a billion times.
we did. The content was king. So a great story is always going to be compelling, and just the technologies
and
make
so
it
think
easy.
about everybody on the billions of phones that are out there now. If this happened again, we would have 50 videos.
Or more than one angle of the same.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
In 3D and
You can
VR.
stitch it together in a VR. Yeah. But
HDR.
yeah.
This is good. Thank you for having us.
Okay. Well, thanks again to the panel. Dave up the back there, Steve, Gary, Pat, Michelle, especially Michelle for hosting us, and
Yes.
thanks for the
And beer, yeah.
I think there's more over there, so seriously help
Yep.
yourself. And if the pizza's cold, there's a microwave just around the corner, so
And
help
where's,
yourselves.
Where's your demo?
In the conference room, so, but seriously, that's for the interested, not the compulsory.
Although the door is locked, you cannot escape.
Put the $20 bill in the slot.